He found her barefoot in the snow, half frozen and barely breathing, 15 miles from the nearest town where no child should ever be. But when the little girl finally opened her eyes and whispered about the tunnel in the mountain, Jackson Reed realized saving her life was only the beginning of a nightmare he never knew existed. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind screamed through the pines like something dying. Jackson Reed stood on the porch of his cabin, axe in hand, watching the sky turn the color of old bruises. He'd seen storms before. 20 years living alone in the Colorado Rockies taught you to read weather the way some men read faces. But this one felt different, meaner. The kind that buried everything under 10 feet of white and didn't apologize. He was 47 years old, built solid from decades of splitting wood and hauling water, with a beard gone more gray than brown, and eyes that had forgotten how to trust easy. The cabin behind him was small, rough-hewn logs chinked with moss and mud, a stone chimney sending thin smoke into the December air. No electricity, no running water, just him, the mountain, and silence so thick you could drown in it. That's how he liked it. Jackson hadn't always been alone. Once, a lifetime ago, he'd had a wife, a daughter, a house in town with neighbors who waved, and a job with the county search and rescue team. But that was before the avalanche. Before Emma. Before the morning, he told his 8-year-old girl to stay close while he checked the trail ahead, and she didn't. Before he spent 3 days digging through snow with his bare hands and found her too late. His wife left 6 months after the funeral. Didn't blame her. He'd left too in every way that mattered. Quit search and rescue, sold the house, bought this patch of frozen nowhere, and built walls thick enough to keep the world out. That was 10 years ago. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 4 months. He turned back to the woodpile and swung the axe. The crack echoed off the mountain face, sharp and final. He needed at least 3 more days' worth of firewood if this storm hit like he thought it would. The radio, his only connection to civilization, had been squawking warnings since yesterday. Blizzard conditions, 0 visibility, travel not recommended. He'd clicked it off. Didn't need some weather girl in Denver telling him what the sky already screamed. By noon, the first flakes started falling. Fat and lazy at first, drifting like ash. Jackson secured the shutters, checked his traps one last time, brought in water from the creek before it froze solid. His hands moved with the efficiency of ritual. Survival wasn't complicated. You prepared, you endured, you didn't hope for anything more. The storm hit just after dark. It came fast and furious, the wind howling so loud it rattled the windows. Snow fell sideways, piling against the door in drifts that climbed higher every hour. Jackson sat by the fire, sharpening his hunting knife, listening to the mountain scream. He'd weathered worse. The winter of 2018 had buried him for 11 days straight. He'd counted every one of them on the cabin wall. This time he didn't bother. Time stopped mattering when you stopped having places to be. He woke before dawn out of habit. The storm had eased just enough to see through the window. 3 feet of fresh snow, maybe more. The world outside looked like someone had erased it. He pulled on his boots, his coat, his gloves, and stepped into the cold. The air bit hard, sharp enough to make his lungs ache. Temperature had dropped to maybe 10 degrees. Wolves would be moving lower, looking for prey. He needed to check the perimeter, make sure nothing had gotten too close during the night. He grabbed his rifle, not because he wanted to use it, but because up here wanting didn't matter, and started his sweep. That's when he saw them. Footprints, small, child-sized. Jackson stopped cold, his breath fogging in front of his face. He blinked, thinking maybe the wind had played tricks, carved shapes in the drifts that looked like prints. But no, these were real, fresh. Maybe an hour old, the edges not yet softened by falling snow. Bare feet. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. No one lived up here, no one came up here, especially not in winter, and no child, no sane adult would be walking barefoot in 10-degree weather. He knelt down, touching the print with his gloved hand. Definitely human, definitely small. And heading away from his cabin toward the ravine. Jackson didn't think. He just moved. He followed the tracks through the trees, rifle slung over his shoulder, every step crunching loud in the morning stillness. The prints staggered, weaving like whoever made them couldn't walk straight. He moved faster. The ravine dropped off sharp about 200 yards east, a 30-foot cliff down to rocks and frozen creek. If someone went over... He found her at the edge. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, collapsed in the snow. She wore thin pajamas, pink with cartoon stars, now soaked through and frozen stiff. No coat, no shoes, no socks. Her feet were blue. Her lips were blue. Her skin, where it showed, was mottled white and grey. She wasn't moving. Jackson dropped to his knees beside her, hands already working. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Faint pulse, barely there. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. Hypothermia, late stage. She had minutes, maybe less. He didn't hesitate. He ripped off his coat and wrapped her in it, lifted her, light as kindling, Jesus, so light, and ran. His boots slipped in the snow. His lungs burned. The cabin was a quarter-mile back, but he covered it in what felt like seconds, adrenaline drowning out everything else. He kicked open the door, carried her straight to the fire, and laid her on the floor. His hands shook as he stripped off her frozen clothes. He'd done this before. Search and rescue, hypothermia protocol, warm them slow. Too fast and the heart stops. He grabbed every blanket he owned, wrapped her tight, placed heated stones from the fire near her core, not touching. He checked her pulse again. Still there. Still faint. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, kid. Stay with me." Her eyes didn't open. Her body didn't move. He kept working. Warmed water on the stove, not hot, just warm. Wet a cloth and dabbed her lips. Checked her extremities. Her fingers were the worst. 2 on her left hand were black at the tips. Frostbite. Bad. He cursed under his breath, wrapping them gently, keeping them elevated. An hour passed, then 2. The storm outside picked up again, rattling the shutters. Jackson didn't leave her side. He checked her pulse every 10 minutes, adjusted the blankets, added wood to the fire, talked to her even though she couldn't hear. "You're okay. You're safe now. I've got you." It was the most he'd said out loud in months. Just before noon, her eyes fluttered open. Jackson froze. Her eyes were brown, wide and glassy with confusion. She stared at the ceiling, then slowly turned her head toward him. When she saw him, bearded, rough, a stranger, her whole body went rigid. She tried to scramble back, but her limbs wouldn't cooperate. Hey, Jackson said softly, holding up his hands. "It's okay. You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't respond, just stared at him like he was a wolf. He stayed still, keeping his voice low and calm. "My name's Jackson. I found you outside. You were freezing. I brought you here to warm up. You're safe now, I promise." Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. She looked around the cabin, at the rough walls, the fire, the rifle leaning in the corner, and Jackson saw the terror bloom in her face. She thought he was the danger. He moved slowly, carefully, backing up a few feet. "I'm not going to touch you. You don't have to be scared. I just want to help." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, still staring. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Panic. He recognized it. He'd seen it before in lost hikers, in people pulled from avalanches, the shock that came after survival. "Are you hungry?" he asked gently. No response. He stood slowly, moved to the stove, ladled soup into a wooden bowl, vegetable and rabbit left over from yesterday. He set it on the floor between them and backed away again. She watched him like a cornered animal. "It's warm," he said. "You should eat." She didn't move. Jackson sat down against the far wall, giving her space. Minutes passed. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind howled. Finally, slowly, she reached for the bowl. Her hands shook so bad she almost dropped it. She brought it to her lips and drank. Once she started, she couldn't stop, gulping it down like she hadn't eaten in days. When the bowl was empty, She set it down and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. She still didn't speak. Jackson waited. Patience was something the mountain had taught him. "What's your name?" he asked after a while. She stared at the fire. He thought maybe she wouldn't answer. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, she whispered, "Sarah." "Sarah," he repeated, nodding. "That's a good name. How old are you, Sarah?" She held up 6 fingers, 6 years old, barefoot in a blizzard, 15 miles from anywhere. His chest tightened. "Sarah, can you tell me how you got out here?" Her face crumpled. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound, just cried silently, her thin shoulders shaking. Jackson felt something crack inside him. He hadn't cried since Emma's funeral, hadn't let himself feel much of anything. But looking at this kid, this terrified, broken little kid, he felt the ice around his heart start to thaw, and it hurt worse than the cold. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You don't have to talk about it. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was trying to decide if that was true. Whatever she saw in his face must have been enough because she nodded, just barely. The rest of the day passed in careful silence. Jackson made more soup. He found an old shirt of his and fashioned it into a makeshift nightgown for her since her clothes were ruined. He checked her feet and hands. The frostbite wasn't as bad as he'd feared, but she'd lose parts of 2 fingertips for sure. She'd need a doctor. But the storm outside had turned into a full whiteout. The radio said it would last at least 3 more days. They were stuck. That night, Jackson gave her his bed. Just a cot with a thin mattress, but better than the floor. And he slept by the fire. He didn't sleep much, though. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's face, heard his wife screaming at him, felt the weight of failure pressing down until he couldn't breathe. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling, listening to Sarah's quiet breathing across the room. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why the hell was a 6-year-old wandering alone on a mountain in the middle of winter? The next morning, Sarah was still afraid, but less. She ate the oatmeal he made. She let him check her hands without flinching too much. She even spoke a few words when he asked yes or no questions. By the afternoon, she was sitting by the fire, wrapped in blankets, watching him carve a piece of wood. "What are you making?" she asked, her voice small and hoarse. "A bird," Jackson said, holding up the half-finished shape. "A chickadee. They're tough little things. Survive up here all winter." She watched his hands work for a while. Then she said, "Can I try?" He hesitated. The knife was sharp, but something in her eyes, a need to do something, to not just be a victim, made him nod. He handed her a small piece of soft pine and a duller blade he used for detail work. "Careful, always cut away from yourself." She took it with both hands, her bandaged fingers clumsy but determined. For the next hour, they carved together in silence. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, as she climbed into the cot, she paused. "Jackson?" "Yeah? Thank you for saving me." His throat closed up. He managed a nod. She lay down, pulling the blanket to her chin. He turned back to the fire. A few minutes later, she spoke again. "Jackson?" "Yeah? Are you going to send me back?" His blood went cold. "Back where?" She didn't answer. He turned to look at her. She was staring at the ceiling, tears running down into her hair. "Please don't send me back. Please." "Sarah, I'm not sending you anywhere, but I need to know. Back where? Where were you before?" She shook her head hard. "I can't, he'll be mad." "Who'll be mad?" "The bad man." Jackson stood slowly, crossed to the bed and knelt beside it. "Sarah, listen to me. There's no bad man here. Just you and me. And I promise you, I will not let anyone hurt you. But I need to understand. Were you taken? Did someone hurt you?" She nodded, fresh tears spilling. "How long were you with him?" She held up both hands, showed all 10 fingers, then one more. 11. 11 what? Days? Weeks? Months? His stomach turned. "Where were you kept?" She pointed. Not at the door, not at the window, down, at the floor. "Underground?" he asked. She nodded. "And you escaped?" Another nod. How? She wiped her eyes with the blanket. There was a tunnel. He didn't know I knew about it. I found it when I was looking for a way out. It goes really far, under the mountain. I ran and ran and ran until I came outside. Then I didn't know where to go. It was so cold. Jackson's mind raced. A tunnel, underground, under the mountain. He'd lived here 20 years. He knew every inch of this range. There were old mines, sure, abandoned claims from the silver rush back in the 1880s, but nothing active, nothing inhabited. Sarah, where's the entrance to this tunnel? I don't know, I just ran. I don't remember. Do you remember anything else? Any landmarks, rocks, trees? She thought hard, her face scrunching with effort. There were big rocks, like a wall, and the tunnel door was behind them. It was metal, heavy. I had to push really hard. A metal door camouflaged by rocks, hidden. Someone had gone to serious effort to keep it concealed. How many other kids were there? He asked, his voice tight. Sarah's face went pale. I don't know. They kept us in different rooms. I heard them sometimes, crying. Jesus Christ. Jackson stood, ran a hand through his hair. This was bigger than a lost kid. This was abduction, trafficking maybe. And whoever had Sarah, whoever had those other kids, was still out there, probably searching for her right now. He looked out the window at the storm. They were snowed in for at least 2 more days. No way to get to town, no way to call for help. His radio was short range, line of sight only. The nearest ranger station was 30 miles away over impassable roads. They were alone. And if the man Sarah escaped from knew these mountains, knew how to track. Jackson grabbed his rifle and checked the load. Then he barricaded the door. Sarah watched him from the bed, eyes wide. Is he coming? No, Jackson lied. I'm just being careful. You're safe here. But he didn't believe it, and he could tell she didn't either. What happens next will uncover a secret buried deep in the mountain, reveal the truth about who took Sarah and why, and force one man to confront a past he thought he'd left behind. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The 3rd day, Sarah started drawing. Jackson had given her an old pencil and the backs of some receipts he'd saved for fire starter. She sat by the window, watching the snow fall, and drew. At first, he didn't pay much attention. Kids drew. It was normal. But when he glanced over her shoulder, his blood froze. She'd drawn a basement, concrete walls, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, and in the corner, stick figures, small ones, huddled together, behind bars. Sarah, he said carefully. What's this? Where I was, she said, not looking up. She kept drawing, added a door, a staircase, a bigger figure standing at the top. The figure had angry lines coming off it. Jackson knelt beside her. How long were you there? She shrugged. A long time, since the leaves changed colors. Autumn. That was at least 2 months, maybe 3. What did the man look like? She drew him, tall, broad, a beard, a hat. Could be anyone. Could be half the men in Colorado. Did he ever say his name? She shook her head. We just called him him. And the other kids, how many were there? I don't know. I never saw them all. Just heard them. Jackson's jaw clenched. Every word out of her mouth made this worse. He needed to get her to authorities, but more than that, he needed to find that tunnel. Because if Sarah had escaped 2 days ago, and whoever took her was still operating, more kids were in danger right now. Sarah, I need you to try really hard to remember. When you came out of the tunnel, which direction did you run? She pointed northeast, toward the ridge, toward the section of mountain Jackson avoided because the rock was unstable. Avalanche risk, not a place you built anything, unless you didn't want to be found. Would you recognize the entrance if you saw it again? She nodded slowly. I think so. The rocks looked like a face, 2 big ones like eyes. Jackson had seen those rocks. He'd passed them 100 times on patrol, back when he still did search and rescue. Twin boulders, glacial deposits sitting at the base of a cliff face. He'd never looked twice, never had a reason to. He made a decision. When the storm breaks, we're going to go look, together. But Sarah, if we find it, I need you to stay back, stay hidden. Can you do that? She looked at him with those big brown eyes, so much older than 6. You're going to stop him? I'm going to try. What if he stops you first? Jackson met her gaze. Then you run. You run as fast as you can to town. Don't stop for anyone. Find the sheriff. Tell him everything. Understand? She nodded, but her hands trembled on the pencil. That night, the storm finally broke. The wind died. The snow stopped. The sky cleared to reveal stars so bright they looked like holes punched in black paper. Jackson stood on the porch, staring at those twin boulders in the distance, visible now in the moonlight. Somewhere under that mountain, children were crying. And tomorrow, he was going to find them. He went back inside. Sarah was asleep, curled into a ball under every blanket he owned. He watched her for a long time. She looked so small, so fragile. 10 years ago, he'd failed to protect Emma. He'd let the mountain take her because he wasn't careful enough, wasn't fast enough, wasn't good enough. But Sarah was still here, still breathing, still fighting. He wasn't going to fail again. Jackson pulled out his old search and rescue pack, the one he'd shoved in the corner and tried to forget. He checked the contents: rope, carabiners, flashlight, first aid kit, flares. Everything still there. Everything still good. He added extra ammunition for the rifle, a hunting knife, zip ties. He didn't know what he'd find in that tunnel, but he was going to be ready. As he packed, he found something at the bottom of the bag. A photo, crumpled and faded. Emma at 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning at the camera. His wife had taken it on their last camping trip. A month before the avalanche. A month before everything ended. He stared at that photo for a long time. Then he tucked it back into the bag and zipped it closed. The past didn't change, but maybe the future could. Morning came cold and clear. Jackson woke Sarah gently. Time to go. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Now? Now! He'd made her boots from rabbit fur and cord, wrapped her hands in extra cloth. It wasn't much, but it would keep her warm enough for the hike. He dressed in layers, strapped on the pack, slung the rifle over his shoulder. They stepped outside into a world transformed. The storm had dumped nearly 4 feet of snow. Everything was white and still, beautiful and deadly. Jackson broke trail, and Sarah followed in his footsteps. The journey to the twin boulders took an hour. His legs burned from the effort of pushing through drifts. Sarah struggled, but didn't complain. When they reached the rocks, Jackson stopped. Up close, they did look like eyes. Massive granite sentinels staring down the mountain. He circled them slowly, looking for anything out of place. Nothing. Just rock and snow and... Wait, there. A shadow. Too straight to be natural. He brushed away snow with his gloved hand. Metal. A seam in the rock face. He pushed. Nothing moved. He felt along the edges, looking for a latch, a handle, anything. Sarah pointed. There, that crack. Push the rock in. Jackson found it. A small stone, loose in the cliff face. He pressed it. Something clicked deep inside the mountain. The entire section of rock face shifted inward an inch, revealing a gap. A door, camouflaged perfectly to look like natural stone. Old, professional, built by someone who knew what they were doing. Jackson's heart hammered. He turned to Sarah. Stay here, behind that tree. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, you run, understand? She grabbed his coat. Don't go. I have to. What if he's there? Then I'll handle it. He pulled the door open. Cold air rushed out, tinged with something chemical. Bleach, maybe. The tunnel beyond was dark, carved rough through stone but reinforced with timber and metal. Electric lights lined the ceiling, but they were off. He clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a passage that went deep, deeper than any mine he'd ever seen. This wasn't prospecting. This was construction, purpose-built, recent. Jackson looked back at Sarah one more time. She was crying silently, shaking her head. He wanted to tell her it would be okay. But he'd learned a long time ago that some promises were just lies dressed up pretty. so he said nothing, just nodded once and stepped into the dark. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy thud that echoed down the tunnel like a coffin closing. And Jackson Reed walked forward into the mountain, toward whatever nightmare was waiting at the other end. Because 20 years ago, he'd been too late to save his daughter. But today, right now, there were children who still had a chance, and he'd be damned if he was going to let them down. The tunnel swallowed him whole, and somewhere in the distance, he heard it, the faint, unmistakable sound of a child crying. The beam from Jackson's flashlight cut through the darkness like a surgical blade, revealing a tunnel that shouldn't exist. The walls were smooth concrete in some places, rough-hewn stone in others, a patchwork of construction that spoke of years, maybe decades of work. Electric wiring ran along the ceiling in neat conduits, though the lights were dead. The air smelled stale and chemical, like someone had scrubbed away evidence. Jackson moved forward slowly, rifle ready, every sense on high alert. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle grade, heading deep into the mountain's core. His boots echoed on the concrete floor, each step a reminder of how alone he was down here, how vulnerable. 20 feet in, the tunnel branched, left or right. He stopped, listening. The crying he'd heard earlier had faded, swallowed by stone and distance. He chose left, following what his gut told him was the main passage. The tunnel continued for what felt like 100 yards, then opened into a room. Jackson swept his flashlight across the space and froze. It was a bunker, not makeshift, not recent. This had been built in the 70s, maybe 80s. Concrete walls reinforced with steel beams. A generator in one corner, silent now. Shelving units lined with supplies, canned food, water jugs, medical kits, all neatly organized. A table with chairs, a cot with a sleeping bag. Someone had lived here, recently. But it was the wall that made his blood run cold. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard like trophies, children, all ages, all backgrounds, some smiling in what looked like school photos, others candid shots taken from a distance, surveillance photos, and beside each picture, a date. Some went back 5 years, some as recent as last month. Jackson's hands trembled as he pulled one down. A girl, maybe 8 years old, blonde hair in pigtails, wearing a yellow dress. The date written below, September 14th. The handwriting was neat, controlled, clinical. He checked another, a boy, 10 or 11, red hair, freckles, October 2nd. Sarah's picture was there too, a school photo from before, when she still smiled. The date, October 9th. Jackson's stomach turned. This wasn't opportunistic. This was organized, methodical. Whoever ran this operation had been hunting children for years, and this bunker was just the staging ground. He took photos with an old digital camera he'd brought, documenting everything. The supplies, the photographs, the layout, evidence. Then he moved deeper. The tunnel continued past the bunker, splitting again. This time he heard something. Faint, rhythmic, like machinery running. He followed the sound down the right-hand passage. The air grew colder. The tunnel walls changed from concrete to natural cave formation, then back to reinforced construction. Whoever built this had incorporated existing cave systems, expanding them, connecting them. Miles of tunnel, probably. A labyrinth. The machinery sound grew louder. Jackson rounded a corner and found the source, a water pump still running, connected to an underground spring. Beside it, a filtration system. Whoever maintained this place had thought of everything. Water, power, ventilation. You could hide down here for months, years, and no one above ground would ever know. Jackson's mind raced back to Sarah's drawings. The basement, the cells, the other children. This bunker was just the entry point. The real horror was somewhere deeper. He had to find it. But first, he needed to understand what he was dealing with. He retraced his steps to the main bunker and searched more carefully. Found a filing cabinet tucked behind the generator, locked. He shot the lock off with his rifle, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Inside were files, maps, documents. Jackson spread them across the table, his flashlight revealing the scope of what he'd stumbled into. The first file was a hand-drawn map of the tunnel system. It was massive. The bunker he stood in was marked as Entry Point Alpha. From there, tunnels branched out like veins, connecting to multiple chambers. One was labeled Storage, another Medical, a third circled in red, Holding. That's where the children were. Jackson traced the route with his finger. 2 tunnels from here, then down a stairwell. Maybe a quarter-mile deeper into the mountain. He checked his watch. He'd been down here 18 minutes. 12 minutes left before Sarah would run. He couldn't make it there and back in time, but he couldn't leave. Not without knowing. He grabbed the radio from his pack and keyed it, knowing it probably wouldn't work this deep underground, but trying anyway. Static. He adjusted the frequency, tried again. More static. Then faintly, a voice. "Copy. Who? This?" Jackson's heart leapt. "This is Jackson Reed. I'm broadcasting from inside a tunnel system in the Ridgemont Range, 15 miles northeast of town. I have an emergency situation. Child trafficking operation. Multiple victims. I need immediate assistance." Static crackled. Then, "Repeat, breaking up." "I said I found a trafficking operation, underground bunker, children being held. Coordinates approximately..." He rattled off his best guess at GPS coordinates based on where he knew the twin boulders sat. "Confirm, children. Affirmative. At least 1 victim recovered. More inside. I'm going in deeper. Send everyone. FBI, state police, everyone. Stay position, help." "I can't. There are kids down here." The signal died. Jackson swore, shoved the radio back in his pack. He didn't know if the message got through or if he'd just been talking to static. Either way, he was committed now. He grabbed the map, memorized the route to the holding area, and moved. The tunnel to the stairwell was narrower, older. The walls here were natural cave, slick with moisture. His flashlight beam bounced off formations that had taken millennia to form, now violated by drills and dynamite. The path descended sharply. He counted steps. 40, 50, 70, 100. At the bottom, the tunnel opened into another chamber, bigger than the bunker. And what Jackson saw there made him understand the full scope of the nightmare. It was a facility. Not a cave, not a bunker. A purpose-built underground complex with multiple rooms, proper doors, functioning electricity from a backup generator humming somewhere in the walls. This was the real operation. The bunker above was just the entrance. Jackson moved through the main room, his rifle up, clearing corners. Empty, but recently occupied. He could smell it. Sweat, fear, the sour tang of too many bodies in too small a space. A folding table held paper plates with half-eaten food, still fresh. Someone had been here hours ago, maybe less. He found the holding cells in the next room and nearly vomited. 6 doors, each with a small window. Metal, industrial, locks on the outside. He approached the first one and shined his light through the window. A small room, maybe 8 by 8 feet. A mattress on the floor. A bucket in the corner. Empty now. But the walls were covered in scratches, tallies, messages. "Help us," carved into the concrete with something sharp, a child's handwriting. The second cell was the same, empty but haunted. The third, the fourth, all empty, all abandoned in a hurry. Blankets left behind. A stuffed bear lying in the corner of one cell, its button eyes reflecting his flashlight like accusations. Jackson's hands shook as he documented everything with his camera. Flash after flash illuminating horrors that shouldn't exist. He found children's clothes in a pile, shoes in varying sizes, a bin of toys, probably used to keep them quiet. And in what looked like an office, he found the proof he needed. A ledger, handwritten, meticulous, dates, descriptions, locations. Subject acquired, followed by ages, physical descriptions, and where they were taken from. Parking lots, playgrounds, walking home from school. The entries went back 7 years. Dozens of children. Most entries ended with a single word. Transferred. Transferred where? To whom? Jackson flipped through pages, his horror deepening with each line. This wasn't one man. This was a network. The ledger referenced buyers, contacts, and distribution points. Coded language, but the meaning was clear. These children were being sold. and the last entry made his blood freeze. October 9th, female, 6 years, brown hair, brown eyes, acquired from Ridgemont Elementary parking lot, holding at facility for pickup scheduled October 20th. Sarah. She'd been scheduled for pickup 3 days ago, but she'd escaped 2 days before that. Whoever was supposed to collect her had arrived to find her gone. That's why the facility was abandoned. Sarah's escape had triggered an evacuation. But where did they go? Jackson found his answer in a stack of documents paperclipped together. Transfer orders, recent, dated 2 days ago, emergency relocation to secondary site. And an address. A property 40 miles west, near the old timber camps. They'd moved the operation, moved the children. Jackson photographed everything, his mind already working through what this meant. Sarah had stumbled into something bigger than a local predator. This was organized crime, interstate trafficking, the kind of operation that had money, resources, and protection behind it. What happens next will turn this rescue into a deadly race against time, expose the shocking truth about who's really behind the operation, and force Jackson to confront whether one man can stand against a system designed to stay hidden. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Jackson was about to leave when he heard it. A sound, faint but distinct, footsteps, coming from deeper in the facility. He killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, rifle raised. The footsteps grew louder. Multiple people, voices. Should have burned it all. Didn't have time. Boss said grab what we could and go. What about the girl? Forget her, she's dead by now. No one survives the mountain in winter. Jackson's jaw clenched. 2 men, maybe 3. Coming to clean up. He had seconds to decide. Confront them or hide. If he confronted them, he might get answers, but he might also get killed, and then no one would know about the secondary site. No one would save those children. He chose survival. Jackson slipped through a side door into what looked like a storage room. Shelves of supplies, boxes of documents. He crouched behind a stack of crates and waited. The footsteps entered the main room. Through a crack in the door he watched. 3 men, all dressed in tactical gear, faces covered. They moved with military precision, dividing tasks without needing to communicate. One started collecting documents from the office. Another gathered the hard drives from computers Jackson hadn't noticed. The third poured gasoline. They were going to burn the evidence. Jackson watched, memorizing details, heights, builds, the way they moved. One of them had a limp. Another favored his right hand, possibly left-handed. The third barked orders with an accent Jackson couldn't place. Not local. Make it fast, the leader said. We need to be at the secondary site before midnight. What about the locals? Anyone asking questions? Negative. Sheriff's on payroll. Ranger station got their monthly donation. No one's looking. Jackson's stomach dropped. The sheriff. Ranger station. How deep did this go? How many people were complicit? The men worked for 10 minutes, gathering anything that could identify them or their operation. Then the leader pulled out a road flare. Light it up. But before he could strike it, a sound echoed through the tunnel. Faint, but unmistakable. A child's cry. All 3 men froze. I thought you said they moved everyone, the leader hissed. They did. Then who the hell is that? They drew weapons and moved toward the sound. Jackson's mind raced. Another child. Still here, hidden or forgotten or left behind deliberately. He couldn't let them find her. Or him. Whichever. He made his decision. Jackson kicked open the storage room door and fired a shot into the ceiling. The explosion in the confined space was deafening. All 3 men spun, weapons raised. Jackson dove behind a desk as return fire tore through the air. Bullets punched through metal, shattered concrete. He rolled, came up firing, hit 1 man in the shoulder. The man went down screaming. The other 2 scattered for cover. The leader shouted into a radio. We've got a hostile. I repeat, hostile in the facility. Requesting backup. Backup. There were more coming. Jackson fired again, keeping them pinned, then ran, back through the holding area toward the sound of crying. A smaller passage he'd missed earlier. He ducked into it as bullets chased him, sparking off walls. The passage twisted, narrowed. He had to turn sideways to fit through. The crying grew louder. At the end of the passage, a small chamber, and huddled in the corner, a boy, maybe 7 years old, dark hair, torn clothes, terrified eyes that went wide when Jackson's flashlight found him. "It's okay," Jackson said, holstering his rifle and raising his hands. "I'm here to help. My name's Jackson. What's yours?" The boy didn't answer, just stared. Behind them, voices. The men were coming. Jackson didn't have time for gentle. He scooped the boy up. The kid weighed nothing, Jesus, skin and bones, and ran back the way he'd come. The boy struggled for a second, then went limp, either trusting or too exhausted to fight. Jackson emerged into the main room just as the 2 remaining men rounded the corner. He fired blindly behind him and sprinted for the exit tunnel. Bullets chased him up the stairs. 100 steps. His lungs screamed, his legs burned. The boy clung to him, silent now, face buried in Jackson's coat. They reached the upper bunker. Jackson grabbed a propane tank he'd seen earlier and rolled it back down the stairs, pulled out his lighter, lit a piece of cloth and tossed it. The explosion rocked the mountain. Fire bloomed up the stairwell, followed by screams. Jackson didn't wait to see if the men made it out. He ran through the entrance tunnel, the boy bouncing against his chest. Behind them, secondary explosions as the fire found the gasoline they'd poured. The metal door appeared ahead. Jackson slammed into it, pushed it open, and burst out into blinding daylight. The cold air hit like a fist. He stumbled, nearly fell, caught himself. Sarah was still there, behind the tree where he'd left her, eyes wide with terror. "Run!" Jackson shouted. "Now!" She didn't need to be told twice. They ran together through the snow, Jackson carrying the boy, Sarah struggling to keep up. Behind them, smoke poured from the tunnel entrance. Then, with a sound like the earth breaking, the entrance collapsed. Rock and snow cascading down, sealing the tunnel. They didn't stop running until they reached the cabin. Inside, Jackson set the boy down on the floor and immediately checked him over. Dehydrated, malnourished, bruises on his arms and ribs, but alive, breathing. The boy stared at nothing in shock. Sarah knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I know him," she whispered. "He was in the room next to mine. His name is Thomas." Thomas. Jackson filed the name away. 2 children saved. But how many more were at that secondary site? How many had already been transferred? He grabbed his radio, cranked the power to maximum, and broadcast in the clear. "This is Jackson Reed broadcasting emergency to any station. I have recovered 2 children from a trafficking operation in the Ridgemont Range. 2 children safe, but there's a secondary location 40 miles west near the old timber camps. Multiple children in danger. Suspects are armed, organized, and have law enforcement cooperation. I repeat, local law enforcement is compromised. Need FBI, state police, anyone clean, please respond. Static." He tried again. Same message. Static. Again. This time a voice broke through. Professional. Calm. "This is Special Agent Maria Cortez, FBI Field Office, Denver. Confirm you have recovered trafficking victims." Jackson nearly sobbed with relief. "Affirmative. 2 children, ages 6 and 7, recovered from underground facility. Facility is destroyed, but suspects escaped. They're headed to secondary location. I have documents, photos, addresses, everything." "Coordinates of your position?" Jackson gave them. "Sit tight. We're scrambling helicopters. ETA 40 minutes. Do not engage further. Repeat, do not engage. Protect the children and wait for extraction." "Understood." The radio went quiet. Jackson set it down and looked at Sarah and Thomas, both wrapped in blankets now, both staring at him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. 40 minutes. He could do 40 minutes. He made them soup, warm clothes, checked their injuries. Thomas still hadn't spoken, but Sarah held his hand and whispered to him, told him he was safe now, told him the bad man couldn't hurt them anymore. Jackson stepped outside onto the porch. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline crash. He'd killed a man, maybe more. The explosion, the collapse, no one could have survived that. He'd taken lives. For the first time since leaving search and rescue, he'd crossed a line he'd sworn never to cross. But when he thought of those cells, those scratches on the wall, those children's faces in photographs on that corkboard, he couldn't find it in himself to feel guilty. Some monsters needed killing. The helicopter arrived 38 minutes later. Not one, three, 2 FBI tactical transports and 1 medical. They landed in the clearing near Jackson's cabin, rotors kicking up snow in blinding clouds. Agents poured out, weapons ready, securing the perimeter. Agent Cortez was exactly what Jackson expected. Mid-40s, sharp-eyed, moving with the kind of authority that didn't need announcement. She approached the cabin with 2 medics and a child psychologist in tow. "Jackson Reed?" He nodded. "The children?" He led her inside. Sarah and Thomas sat together on the cot, holding hands. When they saw the strangers, they pressed closer together. The psychologist, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, knelt in front of them. "Hi there, my name's Dr. Ellis. I'm here to help. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. We're going to take you somewhere warm and safe, okay?" Sarah looked at Jackson. "Is she telling the truth?" Jackson knelt beside her. "Yeah, kid, she is. These are the good guys." "Are you coming?" His throat closed. "I'll be right behind you, I promise." The medics examined both children while Agent Cortez pulled Jackson aside. "We need everything you have. Documents, photos, anything you took from that facility." Jackson handed over his pack. Camera, maps, the ledger he'd grabbed, notes he'd scrawled about what he'd seen. Cortez flipped through them, her expression darkening with every page. "My God," she breathed. "This is federal, multi-state. We've been tracking fragments of this network for 2 years but never found the source. You just handed us everything." "There's a secondary site," Jackson said, 40 miles west. The timber camps. They moved the operation 2 days ago when Sarah escaped. That's where the other children are. Cortez was already on her radio. "I need tactical teams mobilized to coordinates." She rattled off numbers. "Suspected child trafficking operation. Hostages on site. Go in hard and fast." She turned back to Jackson. "The men you encountered, how many?" 3 at the facility, but they called for backup. Could be more. "Descriptions?" He gave her everything he remembered. The limp, the accent, the shoulder wound he'd inflicted. She took notes, nodding. "You did good work here, Mr. Reed. You saved these children's lives." Jackson looked at Sarah being loaded onto a stretcher, wrapped in thermal blankets, holding tight to a stuffed bear one of the medics had given her. "I just did what anyone should. But most people don't." Cortez studied him. "Your radio message said local law enforcement is compromised." "The men said the sheriff's on payroll. Ranger Station too." Her jaw tightened. "We'll handle it. Federal jurisdiction now." The helicopters lifted off 20 minutes later. Sarah pressed her face to the window, looking down at Jackson standing alone in the snow. He waved. She waved back. Then they were gone, disappearing over the ridge toward hospitals and safety and a future that might still hold hope. Jackson stood in the silence they left behind. His cabin felt emptier than it had in years. He went inside, poured himself a whiskey he'd been saving for no particular reason, and sat by the fire. His hands still shook. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. He stared at Emma's photo, still tucked in his pack. "I didn't fail this time," he whispered to her. "I didn't fail." The fire crackled. The wind picked up outside, and for the first time in 10 years, Jackson Reed felt something he'd thought was dead. Purpose. Like maybe his life still meant something after all. 3 hours later, his radio crackled. "Jackson Reed, this is Agent Cortez. We hit the secondary site. Recovered 11 children, ages 5 to 13, all alive, all safe. The suspects are in custody. I wanted you to know. You made this possible." 11 children, plus Sarah and Thomas, 13 lives saved. Jackson keyed the radio, his voice rough. "Thank you for telling me. There's more. The ledger you recovered lists 17 other locations across 6 states. We're coordinating with other field offices now. This network is done, finished, because you didn't look away." He didn't know what to say to that. "One more thing," Cortez continued. "Sarah's asking for you. Keeps saying she won't talk to the doctors until she knows you're okay. Would you be willing to come to the hospital? It might help her." Jackson looked around his empty cabin, at the cot where Sarah had slept, at the crude bird carving she'd left on the table, at the drawings she'd made still scattered on the floor. "Yeah," he said, "I'll come." He packed a bag, locked the cabin, and started down the mountain. Behind him, smoke still rose from where the tunnel had collapsed, a grave for monsters, a testament to the fact that sometimes the mountain gave back what it took. And as Jackson walked through the snow toward town, toward hospitals and questions and a little girl who needed to know he kept his promises, he realized something. He'd spent 10 years hiding from the world because he couldn't save one child. But today, he'd helped save 13. And maybe, just maybe, that was a start toward forgiveness. Not from anyone else. From himself. The mountain wind followed him down, carrying the scent of pine and snow and something that felt almost like hope. The hospital sat at the edge of Ridgemont like a concrete fortress against the mountain backdrop. Jackson had driven past it 1,000 times in his old life, back when he was still part of the world. Now, walking through the automatic doors into the fluorescent brightness, he felt like a ghost stepping back into the land of the living. Everything was too loud, too bright, too many people moving with purpose he'd forgotten how to understand. He stood in the lobby, his worn boots tracking snow onto polished linoleum, until a nurse approached him. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Sarah, the girl who came in on the helicopter. Agent Cortez called me." The nurse's expression softened immediately. "Mr. Reed? She's been asking for you. 3rd floor, pediatric wing, room 317. The elevator ride felt like descending into his own anxiety. Jackson caught his reflection in the polished doors, beard wild, hair unkempt, wearing the same clothes he'd been in for 3 days. He looked like exactly what he was, a mountain hermit who'd stumbled into something way over his head. The 3rd floor was quieter. Pastel walls, cartoon murals, a nurse's station where 2 women looked up as he passed. One reached for a phone. Word traveled fast. Room 317 had the door cracked open. Jackson knocked softly. "Come in," a woman's voice called. He pushed the door wider. Sarah sat propped up in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm, her bandaged fingers resting on top of clean white sheets. She looked impossibly small against the pillows. Dr. Ellis, the psychologist from the helicopter, sat in a chair beside the bed, and standing near the window was Agent Cortez. But Sarah only had eyes for Jackson. "You came," she whispered, and her whole face transformed, relief and joy and something that looked like wonder all mixed together. Jackson crossed to the bed and knelt so he was at her eye level. "Course I came. I promised, didn't I?" She nodded, tears spilling. "I thought maybe you wouldn't. Everyone always says things and then they don't." His chest ached. "I keep my promises, Sarah. Always." She reached out with her good hand and touched his face, like she needed to confirm he was real. Her fingers were warm against his beard. "They want me to talk about what happened, about the bad place, but I can't. Not without you here." Jackson glanced at Dr. Ellis, who nodded encouragingly. "I can stay," he said, "if that helps." It helps. For the next 2 hours, Sarah told her story. Jackson sat on the edge of the bed, holding her hand, while Dr. Ellis asked gentle questions and Agent Cortez took notes. Sarah spoke haltingly at first, then faster, like poison pouring out of a wound. She'd been taken from the elementary school parking lot. A man had asked if she'd seen a lost puppy. She'd tried to help. He'd grabbed her, put something over her face that made everything go dark. When she woke up, she was in the basement room with concrete walls and a single light bulb. There were other children. She could hear them crying at night. Sometimes the bad man would bring them food. Sometimes he'd forget for days. They weren't allowed to talk, weren't allowed to make noise. If they did, the light went out and they'd be left in complete darkness. Sarah had been there for 73 days. She'd counted by scratching marks on the wall with a pebble she'd found. 73 days of fear and cold and hunger and wondering if anyone was looking for her. Then 2 days before Jackson found her, she'd heard the man talking on a phone, saying someone was coming to pick up the merchandise. She knew what that meant, even at 6 years old. She was going to be taken somewhere else, somewhere she'd never escape from. That night, while the man slept upstairs, she'd explored the basement looking for anything, a window, a vent, any way out. She'd found the tunnel door hidden behind a false wall panel. It wasn't locked from the inside. She'd opened it and run into darkness, following the slope upward, knowing if she stopped she'd die or worse. She'd run until she couldn't run anymore, until the tunnel spit her out into a snowstorm on a mountain she didn't recognize. She'd kept walking because staying still meant freezing, and then she'd seen Jackson's cabin in the distance and collapsed. By the time she finished, everyone in the room was crying except Sarah. She'd cried all her tears months ago. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," Jackson told her, his voice thick. "I'm not brave," Sarah said. "I'm just alive." "That's the same thing, kid." Agent Cortez cleared her throat, wiping her eyes. "Sarah, the children we found at the other location, they want to thank you. If you hadn't escaped, if you hadn't led us to the evidence, we never would have found them. You saved their lives." Sarah looked down at her bandaged hands. "Are they okay?" "They will be, thanks to you." After Sarah fell asleep, exhausted from reliving trauma, Jackson stepped into the hallway with Agent Cortez. She led him to a private conference room and spread files across the table. "I want to show you something," she said, "so you understand what you uncovered." The files contained photos, documents, arrest records. The network Sarah had been part of stretched across 11 states, 37 people in custody so far. More arrests coming. Judges, police officers, social workers, businessmen, all complicit, all profiting from stolen children. "The man who took Sarah," Cortez said, pulling out a mugshot. "His name is Dennis Howell, former military, dishonorably discharged in 2009. We picked him up this morning trying to cross into Canada. He's talking, trying to cut a deal, giving us names." Jackson stared at the face. Ordinary, forgettable. The kind of man you'd pass on the street and never notice. Evil rarely looked like monsters. "The sheriff?" Jackson asked. "Arrested 2 hours ago. Ranger station supervisor too. We're auditing every case they touched for the last 5 years. How many children they let disappear without investigation." Cortez pulled out another file. This one had photos of a compound, aerial surveillance. "The secondary site where we found the 11 children. It was a hunting lodge owned by a shell corporation. Records buried under 6 layers of false ownership. The children were being held there temporarily before being moved to buyers across the country." Jackson felt sick. "Buyers? Yes, we've identified 12 so far. Wealthy men, powerful men, men who thought money could buy them anything, including children." Her jaw set hard. "They were wrong." She showed him more. Maps of the tunnel system, now fully surveyed by forensic teams. It was even more extensive than Jackson had realized. The main facility had been built in the 1970s as a survivalist bunker during the Cold War. Abandoned in the 80s. Discovered and repurposed by the trafficking network in 2016. 7 years of operation. Over 60 children moved through it. "Because of the evidence you recovered," Cortez said, "we've been able to identify and locate 43 of those children. Some are adults now, some are still missing, but we're bringing them home." Jackson's hands trembled. 43 families getting answers. 43 people who'd spent years wondering if their child was alive or dead, finally knowing. "What happens to Sarah?" he asked. Cortez's expression clouded. "That's complicated. We've run her fingerprints, her DNA, cross-referenced with missing children databases. Her real name is Sarah Mitchell. She was reported missing by her mother on October 10th from Ridgemont. But here's the problem. Her mother died 3 weeks ago. Car accident. No other family we can locate. No father on the birth certificate." The room felt colder. "So she's alone. She'll go into foster care. We'll find her a good placement, somewhere safe." "How many times has she been uprooted already?" Jackson's voice was hard. "Taken from her mom, kidnapped, held for months, escaped, found me. Now you want to move her again, to strangers." Mr. Reed, I understand your concern. Do you? He stood, pacing. That kid has been through hell. The only constant she's had in months is me, and you want to tear her away from that? Cortez met his eyes steadily. What are you suggesting? Jackson stopped. What was he suggesting? He lived in a cabin with no electricity, no running water, 15 miles from the nearest town. He had no experience with children beyond the daughter he'd failed to save. He was a broken man hiding from his past in the mountains. But when he thought about Sarah being moved to another stranger's house, another temporary place, his chest felt like it was caving in. I don't know, he admitted. I just know she shouldn't be alone anymore. Cortez studied him for a long moment. There's a process for emergency foster placement, background checks, home visits, training. It takes months usually. Usually? There are exceptions, for special circumstances, if a child has bonded with a potential guardian, if separation would cause additional trauma. She paused. I could make some calls. Jackson looked through the conference room window to where Sarah's room was visible down the hall. He could see her through the doorway, small and alone in that big hospital bed. Make the calls, he said. The next 3 days were a blur. Jackson stayed at a motel in town, the first time he'd slept in a building that wasn't his cabin in 5 years. Social workers interviewed him. Psychologists evaluated him. Background checks revealed his history. Decorated search and rescue veteran, no criminal record, stable if unconventional living situation. They asked about Emma, about why he'd isolated himself, about whether he was emotionally equipped to care for a traumatized child. Jackson answered honestly. He was damaged goods, but he was all Sarah wanted. Dr. Ellis, the child psychologist, became his unlikely advocate. Sarah has formed what we call a trauma bond with Mr. Reed, she explained to the placement committee. He represents safety to her, security. Separating them now would undo much of the healing that's already begun. I recommend emergency placement with intensive support services. On the 4th day, they said yes. Jackson was back in Sarah's hospital room when Dr. Ellis delivered the news. Sarah had been moved out of intensive care, her frostbite healing, her physical injuries minor compared to the psychological ones. Sarah, Dr. Ellis said gently, how would you feel about going home with Jackson when you're released? Sarah's eyes went wide. Really? For real? For real. He'd be your foster father. It means he'd take care of you. Make sure you're safe, fed, happy. Would you like that? Sarah looked at Jackson, her expression so hopeful it hurt to see. Would I live in the cabin? If you want to, Jackson said. We'd have to fix it up some. Make it warmer. Get you a real bed. Maybe even convince the power company to run a line out there. I don't need electricity, Sarah said seriously. I just need you to be there. His throat closed. He nodded because he couldn't speak. Sarah turned back to Dr. Ellis. Yes, I want to go with Jackson. But before they could celebrate, Agent Cortez appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. We have a problem. She pulled Jackson into the hallway while a nurse distracted Sarah with lunch. Dennis Howell escaped custody 2 hours ago, Cortez said without preamble. Jackson's blood went cold. How? Transport vehicle was ambushed between the county jail and federal holding. 3 officers injured, Howell and 2 other suspects taken by armed men. Professional extraction. The network. Yes, we knew we hadn't caught everyone, but we didn't anticipate this level of organization. She handed him a tablet showing security footage. 4 men in tactical gear, faces covered, hitting the transport van with military precision, in and out in 90 seconds. Do you think he'll run? Jackson asked, though he already knew the answer. I think he'll tie up loose ends. The children we recovered can identify him, testify against him, especially Sarah. She spent the most time with him, can describe the facility, the tunnel. She's the prosecution's star witness. You're saying he'll come for her? I'm saying it's a possibility we have to prepare for. Cortez looked exhausted. We're moving all the recovered children to protective custody, federal safe houses, U.S. Marshals protection. And Sarah? She goes with them. The hell she does. Jackson's voice was flat, hard. You just approved me as her placement. Now you want to rip her away and hide her in some safe house with strangers? It's for her protection. I can protect her. Cortez gave him a look. Mr. Reed, these are professionals, ex-military, well-funded. They've already killed to protect this network. One man in a cabin in the woods is not adequate security. One man in a cabin is exactly where Sarah survived before, where she felt safe. You take her away now, after everything, you'll break her. They stood in the hallway, two immovable forces. Finally, Cortez sighed. I can assign agents to you. Surveillance, security detail, but Sarah stays in your custody. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Jackson considered. He didn't like the idea of federal agents crawling all over his mountain, but if it kept Sarah safe and with him, he'd accept it. Deal. They released Sarah from the hospital 3 days later. She wore new clothes donated by a local church, jeans that were too big, a purple sweater, sneakers with lights in the heels that made her smile. Her bandages had been reduced to just tape on her fingertips. The frostbite would leave scars, but she'd keep all her fingers. Jackson had spent those 3 days preparing. He'd hired contractors, first time in his life, to winterize the cabin properly. Insulation, a wood stove that actually heated the whole space, a generator for electricity, a real bed for Sarah's room, which was really just a corner partitioned with blankets, but it was hers. 2 FBI agents, Rodriguez and Chang, had set up a surveillance post a quarter-mile from the cabin, cameras on the approach roads, motion sensors. They rotated shifts, invisible but present. When Jackson pulled up to the cabin in a borrowed truck, Sarah pressed her face to the window, taking it all in. Snow had fallen again, covering everything in fresh white. Smoke curled from the chimney. It looked like something from a Christmas card. It's perfect, she breathed. Inside, Jackson showed her what he'd done. The partitioned corner had a real bed frame now, blankets piled high, a stuffed bear Dr. Ellis had given her sitting on the pillow. A small bookshelf held picture books donated by the hospital. A lamp, electric, running off the generator, cast warm light. This is mine? Sarah asked. All yours. She climbed onto the bed, bouncing slightly, testing it. Then she lay back and stared at the ceiling, a smile spreading across her face. I never had my own bed before. Mama and me slept on a couch mostly. Jackson filed that information away with all the other heartbreaking details he was learning about her life. Well, you've got one now. That first week was an adjustment. Sarah woke up screaming from nightmares 3 times. Jackson would rush to her, hold her until the terror passed, remind her where she was. She was afraid of the dark, so he left the lamp on all night. She was afraid of closed doors, so they kept everything open. She was afraid of loud noises, so Jackson moved carefully, spoke softly, became a different version of himself. He taught her to carve wood, to identify animal tracks in the snow, to start a fire safely. She taught him to laugh again, to see wonder in small things, the way icicles caught sunlight, the pattern of frost on windows, the taste of hot chocolate made from scratch. Agent Rodriguez visited every morning, checking in, scanning the perimeter. All quiet, he'd report. No movement, no threats. But Jackson couldn't shake the feeling of waiting, of a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. 2 weeks after Sarah came home, the storm hit. It was 3 in the morning when Jackson woke to the sound of his perimeter alarm, a simple string of bells he'd rigged to the trees, jingling softly. He was out of bed instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Outside, the world was dark except for starlight on snow. Movement. There. At the tree line. Multiple figures. Jackson crossed to Sarah's bed and shook her awake gently. Sarah, wake up. Stay quiet. Her eyes opened, immediately alert. Fear, but not panic. What's wrong? Someone's outside. I need you to do exactly what we practiced, okay? They'd run drills, just in case. Sarah nodded and slipped out of bed. Jackson led her to the trapdoor he'd cut in the floor, covered by a rug normally, that led to a crawl space beneath the cabin. Small, hidden, with supplies, water, food, a radio. Get in. Lock it from inside. Don't come out unless you hear my voice or Agent Rodriguez's. Understand? Jackson, I'll be fine, but I need to know you're safe, please. She climbed down. He lowered the trap door and slid the rug back in place. Then he grabbed his radio and keyed it. Rodriguez, we have movement. Multiple contacts approaching from the north. Static, then. Copy that. We see them on thermal. 4 individuals, armed. We're moving to intercept. Stay inside and get down. Jackson killed the lights and took position by the window. Through the scope on his rifle, he could make out figures moving through the trees. Professional. Tactical formation. They spread out, surrounding the cabin. Then his radio crackled again. Rodriguez's voice tense. We've got 2 more coming from the south. This is a coordinated assault. We're calling for backup, but... Gunfire erupted. Muzzle flashes lit the forest like lightning. Jackson ducked as bullets tore through the cabin walls, shattering windows, punching holes in the logs. He returned fire blindly, just trying to keep them back. The attack lasted 3 minutes, then silence. Jackson waited, breathing hard, ears ringing. His radio was dead, hit by a stray bullet. The generator had been shot out, plunging everything into darkness. He could hear voices outside, shouting, movement. Then the door exploded inward. 2 men burst through, weapons raised. Jackson fired. One went down. The other dove for cover, returning fire. Wood splintered. The coffee pot on the stove shattered. Jackson rolled behind the overturned table, chambering another round. "Where's the girl?" the man shouted. "Give her up and we walk away." "Like hell," Jackson growled. He popped up, fired twice, missed. The man was already moving, combat-trained, using the cabin's layout for cover. They exchanged shots in the darkness, both trying to gain position. Jackson's rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, drew the hunting knife from his belt, and charged. The man was reloading. Jackson hit him low and hard, driving the knife up under the ribs. The man gasped, convulsed, went still. Jackson grabbed the man's rifle and spun toward the door just as 2 more figures appeared. He fired. They scattered. One cried out, hit. The other laid down suppressing fire, backing toward the trees. Then headlights blazed through the forest. Engines roaring. FBI tactical vehicles crashed through the underbrush. Agents in full gear poured out, weapons up, flashlights cutting the darkness. "Federal agents, drop your weapons!" The gunfire intensified. Jackson threw himself flat as bullets crossed overhead. The fight moved away from the cabin, deeper into the woods. Shouts, commands, more shots. Then gradually, silence. Jackson lay on the floor of his destroyed cabin, breathing hard, covered in blood, some his, some not. His ears rang, his hands shook, but he was alive. "Mr. Reed!" Agent Rodriguez burst through the door, weapon raised, then lowered when he saw Jackson. "You hit." "I'm fine. Sarah. Where is she?" Jackson scrambled to the rug, yanked it aside, pounded on the trapdoor. "Sarah, it's me. You can come out." Nothing. Fear spiked through him. "Sarah!" Then the lock clicked. The door lifted an inch. One brown eye peered out, terrified. "It's okay," Jackson said, his voice breaking. "It's over. You're safe." The door opened fully. Sarah climbed out and threw herself into his arms, sobbing. Jackson held her, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other around her small frame. She was shaking like a leaf. "I was so scared," she cried into his shoulder. "I know, baby, I know, but you did perfect. You were so brave." Agent Rodriguez stepped outside, spoke into his radio. Through the broken window, Jackson could see more agents securing the perimeter, bodies being covered, evidence markers going up. Cortez arrived 20 minutes later in a helicopter. She surveyed the scene, the destroyed cabin, the casualties, Jackson sitting on the porch steps with Sarah wrapped in a blanket against his chest. And her expression was grim. 4 suspects down, she reported. 2 in custody, the rest scattered. We've got teams tracking them. Was Howell one of them? Jackson asked. No, but one of the men we captured is talking. Says Howell ordered the hit personally. Wanted Sarah silenced before the trial. Sarah pressed closer to Jackson. He tightened his arms around her. "This location is compromised," Cortez said. "We need to move you. Safe house. Federal protection." Jackson looked down at Sarah, at the terror still lingering in her eyes, at the way she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. Then he looked at the cabin. Bullet holes, broken windows, blood on the snow. The place he'd called home for 10 years, destroyed in minutes. "Okay," he said quietly. "We'll go." The safe house was 3 hours south, a nondescript ranch house on 40 acres of nothing. Tall fence, security cameras, armed guards that pretended to be ranch hands. Sarah hated it on sight. "It feels like the bad place," she whispered to Jackson that first night. "All the locks, the cameras, people watching." He understood. It felt like a prison to him, too, even if it was for their protection. They settled into a routine. Dr. Ellis visited twice a week for therapy sessions. Sarah was making progress, but the attack had set her back. The nightmares returned worse than before. She wouldn't let Jackson out of her sight. Meanwhile, the investigation expanded. The men captured at the cabin gave up more names, more locations. The network unraveled like a thread pulled from a sweater. 52 arrests, 73 children recovered. News cameras descended on Ridgemont. Jackson refused all interviews. But the one name they couldn't find was Dennis Howell. He'd gone to ground. No credit cards, no phone pings, no sightings, like he'd vanished into smoke. But Cortez warned Jackson not to relax. "Men like Howell don't quit," she said during one of her visits to the safe house. "They fixate. Sarah is unfinished business to him. He'll try again." "Then let him," Jackson said coldly. "We'll be ready." 3 weeks into their stay at the safe house, Jackson woke at 2 a.m. to find Sarah's bed empty. Panic seized him. He searched the house frantically, bathroom, kitchen, living room. Found her finally on the back porch, sitting on the steps in her pajamas, staring at the dark fields. "Sarah, you scared me half to death. What are you doing out here?" She didn't look at him. "I don't want to be scared anymore." Jackson sat beside her. "I know. When will it stop? When will I stop seeing his face every time I close my eyes?" He had no answer. His own nightmares about Emma had never stopped, just dulled over time into something bearable. "I don't know if it ever fully stops," he said honestly, "but it gets easier. The scared gets smaller, the brave gets bigger, and one day you wake up and realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're living." She leaned against him. "Were you scared when the bad men came to the cabin?" "Terrified. You didn't look scared." "That's the secret. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs doing anyway." She thought about that. "I want to be brave like you." "Kid, you're already braver than I'll ever be. You survived months in that place, escaped, saved other kids by being willing to talk about it. That's real courage." She looked up at him, eyes shining in the porch light. "Will you always keep me safe?" The question hit him hard. Because he couldn't promise that. The world was dangerous. Bad things happened. He knew that better than anyone. But he could promise to try. "I will do everything in my power," he said, "to keep you safe, and I will never ever give up on you. That's a promise I can make." She nodded, satisfied, and rested her head on his shoulder. They sat together in the darkness, two broken people trying to put each other back together. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the cabin attack. Agent Cortez arrived at the safe house with news. "We got him." Jackson looked up from where he was helping Sarah with a puzzle. "Howell. Found him hiding in an abandoned hunting cabin in Wyoming. Tried to shoot his way out. Didn't work." She smiled grimly. "He's in federal custody now. Maximum security. No bail. Trial set for March." Relief flooded through Jackson. "It's over?" "The immediate threat? Yes, we've dismantled the entire network, frozen assets, shut down operations in 8 states. It'll take years to prosecute everyone involved, but the trafficking is done." Sarah, who'd been quiet, looked at Cortez. "Do I have to see him at the trial?" "We'd like you to testify," Cortez said gently. But we can do it via video link. You wouldn't have to be in the same room. Sarah considered this. Then, to Jackson's surprise, she shook her head. I want to be there, in the room. I want him to see me and know I'm not scared anymore. Jackson's chest swelled with pride and terror in equal measure. Sarah, you don't have to. I want to, she said firmly, for the other kids, so they know it's okay to tell. Dr. Ellis, who'd been listening from the doorway, smiled. That's very brave, Sarah. I'm learning from the best, Sarah said, looking at Jackson. The trial was scheduled for March 15th. They had 3 months to prepare. 3 months of relative peace at the safe house. 3 months for Sarah to heal and Jackson to figure out what came next. Because eventually, the FBI protection would end, the safe house would close, and he'd have to decide, go back to the mountain, to isolation and safety, or stay in the world, messy and dangerous as it was, for Sarah's sake. One night, as Sarah slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, Jackson sat at the kitchen table filling out paperwork. Not temporary foster care anymore, adoption papers. Dr. Ellis had left them with him. When you're ready, she'd said. He stared at the forms. All those questions about his ability to provide, to parent, to love. All those doubts he'd carried for 10 years about whether he was enough. But then he thought about Sarah's laugh. The way she'd learned to carve. The way she called him Jackson, but sometimes in her sleep whispered, Dad. He picked up the pen and started writing. Outside, snow began to fall, the first storm of a new season. But inside the safe house, something was finally warm. March 15th arrived cold and grey. Jackson stood in front of the bathroom mirror at the safe house, attempting to knot a tie for the first time in a decade. His hands fumbled with the fabric, muscle memory long forgotten. Sarah appeared in the doorway, already dressed in the navy blue dress Dr. Ellis had bought for her. She looked older somehow, more serious. You're doing it wrong, she said. I know. She crossed to him and, with surprising deftness for a 6-year-old, fixed his tie. Mama taught me before she got sick. She said every girl should know how to tie a tie in case the men in her life forget. Jackson's throat tightened. Sarah rarely mentioned her mother. The loss was still too raw, buried under the newer trauma. But moments like this, small everyday moments, reminded him that this child had already survived more grief than most people experienced in a lifetime. You look beautiful, he said. You look nervous. I am? Me too. She took his hand. But we're doing it together, right? Right. The federal courthouse in Denver was a fortress of marble and metal detectors. Agent Cortez met them at the entrance with 2 U.S. Marshals. The prosecution is ready. Defense will try to rattle Sarah, make her seem unreliable, but the judge won't tolerate bullying. Just tell the truth. That's all we need. They were escorted through back corridors to avoid the media circus out front. Jackson had seen the headlines. Mountain man saves trafficking victim. Child survivor to testify against captor. Justice for the stolen. They made him sound like a hero. He didn't feel like one, just a man trying to do right by a kid who deserved better. The courtroom was smaller than Jackson expected. Wood paneling, high ceilings, a handful of spectators, mostly press and victim advocates. Dennis Howell sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled, face blank. When Sarah entered the room, his eyes tracked her movement. She stopped walking for just a second, then lifted her chin and kept going. Jackson wanted to put himself between them, wanted to shield her from that gaze. But this was her moment, her choice to be here. He sat in the gallery, hands clenched, while Sarah took her place in the witness box. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Amanda Chen, approached gently. Good morning, Sarah. Thank you for being here. I know this is hard. Sarah's voice was small but steady. It's okay. Sarah, do you see the man who took you in this courtroom? She looked directly at Howell. Yes, him. Can you point to him for the record? Sarah pointed. Howell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger, or maybe fear that this child he'd tried to break was about to break him instead. For the next hour, Sarah answered questions. Where she'd been taken, how long she'd been held, what the facility looked like. the other children she'd heard, the tunnel she'd escaped through. Her voice never wavered. When the defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, tried to suggest her memory was unreliable, that she was confused, Sarah looked him dead in the eye. "I remember everything," she said. "Every day, every night, every time I was scared. I remember all of it." The attorney backed down. When it was over, Sarah stepped down from the witness stand and walked straight to Jackson. He opened his arms and she climbed into his lap, something she was getting almost too big for, and buried her face in his shoulder. He held her while the prosecution called the next witness, Thomas, the boy Jackson had pulled from the facility. Then another child, then another. 13 children total testified over 3 days. 13 voices that refused to stay silent. 13 reasons why Dennis Howell and 6 co-defendants would never see freedom again. The verdict came on March 20th. Guilty on all counts. Human trafficking, kidnapping, conspiracy, racketeering. The judge sentenced Howell to 8 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted in applause. Jackson felt Sarah's grip on his hand loosen for the first time in months. "It's really over?" she whispered. "It's really over." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since he'd found her in the snow, she smiled. Not a small smile, not a careful smile, a real, full, unguarded smile that transformed her entire face. "Can we go home now?" Jackson thought about the cabin, still being repaired. Thought about the mountain waiting. Then he looked around the courtroom at the other families, parents reunited with children, siblings finding each other, people who'd spent years not knowing finally getting answers. "Yeah," he said, "we can go home." But first, there was something he needed to do. Agent Cortez had arranged for all the recovered children and their families to meet at a hotel conference room that evening. A chance to decompress, to connect, to begin the long process of healing together. Jackson almost didn't go. Crowds made him anxious after so many years alone. But Sarah wanted to see Thomas and the other kids, so he went. The room was chaos in the best way. Children running, laughing, playing like children should. Parents crying happy tears. Therapists and social workers hovering supportively. Jackson stood against the wall, overwhelmed by the noise and energy and emotion. Then a woman approached him, mid-30s, dark hair, exhausted eyes. She held the hand of a young boy, 9 or 10 years old, who Jackson recognized from the trial. "Mr. Reed?" He nodded. "I'm Michelle Sanchez. This is my son Carlos. He was taken 14 months ago from a park in New Mexico. We thought—" Her voice broke. "We thought we'd never see him again." Jackson didn't know what to say. "I'm glad you found each other. Agent Cortez told me you're the one who found the evidence, who saved these children." She was crying now. "I don't have words big enough to thank you. I just did what anyone—" "No." She cut him off, fierce. "Most people look away. Most people don't want to see the darkness. You didn't. You went into that tunnel. You fought for them. You gave us our babies back." Carlos tugged on his mother's hand. "Mama, can I talk to him?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. Carlos stepped closer to Jackson, shy but determined. "Sarah told me you live on a mountain, that you taught her to carve wood and track animals." "I did." "That sounds cool. I like the outdoors too." Jackson knelt to the boy's level. "Your mama missed you a lot." "I know. I missed her too." Carlos's voice dropped. "Sometimes I thought I'd die down there, in the dark. But then Sarah escaped and I heard the men saying someone was looking for us. That gave me hope." Something in Jackson's chest cracked open. He'd spent 10 years believing he was done saving people, that he'd failed too completely to ever try again. But here was proof, living, breathing proof, that he'd been wrong. "You're a brave kid," Jackson managed. "Sarah says you're the bravest person she knows." Jackson glanced across the room to where Sarah was showing Thomas how to fold a paper crane, something Dr. Ellis had taught her. She was teaching others now, passing on what she'd learned, growing beyond her trauma. "Your mama's waiting for you," Jackson said to Carlos. "You should go be with her." The boy hugged him suddenly, fiercely, then ran back to Michelle. She mouthed "thank you" over his head. Jackson just nodded. The pattern repeated through the evening. Parents thanking him, children telling him stories, press wanting interviews he refused. By the time they left, Jackson's face hurt from holding back tears. Sarah fell asleep in the car on the drive back to the safe house, exhausted but peaceful. Agent Rodriguez, driving, caught Jackson's eye in the rearview mirror. "You did good, man." "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know. That's why it matters." The FBI closed the safe house 2 weeks later. The threat was neutralized. The trials were concluded. Time to return to normal life, whatever that meant now. Jackson had decisions to make. The cabin was repaired but still remote, still isolated. Was that the right environment for a 6-year-old? Or should he move to town, find a real house with neighbors and a school nearby? He posed the question to Sarah one morning over breakfast. "Where do you want to live? The mountain or town?" She thought carefully, chewing her toast. "Can we go back to the cabin for a while? I miss it. I miss the quiet. But maybe sometimes we could come to town, for school and to see Thomas and Dr. Ellis. A compromise, not all or nothing, a middle path." "I think we can do that," Jackson said. They returned to the cabin in early April. Spring was coming to the Rockies, snow melting, creeks running high, wildflowers pushing through the last patches of white. The contractors had done good work. The bullet holes were patched, new windows installed. The generator now ran a proper electrical system. Solar panels on the roof. A water heater Jackson had never thought he'd own. But the bones of the place were the same, still his sanctuary, still home. Sarah ran through the cabin, checking every corner, reacquainting herself with the space. She stopped at her partitioned bedroom, now properly walled off with a door she could close if she wanted privacy. Her bed was there, remade with fresh sheets, the bookshelf overflowing with new books donated by the community. "It's perfect," she breathed. That night they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Sarah was quiet, contemplative. "Jackson?" "Yeah?" "Are you going to adopt me for real, or am I just fostering?" He'd been waiting for this question. The adoption papers had been filed, background checks completed, home study finished. They were just waiting for a court date. "I want to adopt you," he said carefully. "Make it official, but only if that's what you want." "Would I have to call you Dad?" "You could call me Jackson, or Dad, or anything else you want. That part's up to you." She leaned against his shoulder. "I had a dad once. I don't remember him much. He left before I was born. But Mama said he gave me good genes." Jackson smiled despite himself. She was right. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "I'd like to have a dad again, a real one who stays." His eyes burned. "I'm not going anywhere, kid." "Then yes, I want you to adopt me." The court date came in June. Judge Maria Torres presided, a grandmother of 5 who looked at Jackson and Sarah with warmth and understanding. The proceeding was simple, formality really. The decision had already been made by every agency involved. "Mr. Reed," Judge Torres said, "you understand that adoption is permanent, that Sarah will legally be your daughter in every sense?" "I understand, Your Honor." "And you're prepared to provide for her emotionally, physically, financially?" "Yes, ma'am." She turned to Sarah. "And Sarah, do you understand what adoption means? That Jackson will be your father?" "Yes," Sarah said clearly. "Is this what you want?" "More than anything." Judge Torres smiled and brought down the gavel. "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Sarah Mitchell is now legally Sarah Reed. Congratulations to you both." Jackson hadn't cried since Emma's funeral, but sitting in that courtroom, watching a clerk hand him official papers declaring Sarah his daughter, he wept. Sarah climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart." They celebrated at the diner in Ridgemont, Sarah's choice. She ordered a chocolate milkshake and the biggest burger on the menu. The waitress, an older woman named Gladys who'd lived in town forever, brought over a slice of pie. "On the house," she said, "for the Reed family." The Reed family. Jackson liked the sound of that. Word spread through town. By the time they finished eating, half of Ridgemont had stopped by to offer congratulations. The hardware store owner, the librarian, even Sheriff Mackenzie, recently elected after his predecessor's arrest, shook Jackson's hand. "You're good people," Mackenzie said. "This town's lucky to have you." Jackson didn't know about that. But for the first time in a decade, he felt like he belonged somewhere beyond the mountain. Summer passed in a rhythm Jackson had never experienced before. He enrolled Sarah in the local elementary school for fall, which meant trips to town for supplies, for meetings with teachers, for playdates with other children. She thrived, made friends easily, brought home drawings and report cards with straight A's, but she also loved the cabin, loved the hikes they took to identify plants, loved the wood carving they did together in the evenings, loved sitting on the porch at night counting stars, listening to coyotes sing in the distance. She was healing. Nightmares came less frequently. Fear had a smaller foothold. Dr. Ellis, who drove up monthly for check-ins, marveled at her progress. "She's resilient," Dr. Ellis told Jackson one afternoon while Sarah played outside. "But she's also secure. She knows you're not leaving. That stability is everything." "I won't leave," Jackson said simply. "Not ever." Dr. Ellis studied him. "You've healed too, you know. The man I met in that hospital. He was broken, hiding. You're not hiding anymore." She was right. Somewhere between finding Sarah in the snow and signing adoption papers, Jackson had stopped running from his past. Emma would always be part of him. The grief would always ache, but it didn't define him anymore. He was more than the father who failed. He was also the father who tried again. In September, Jackson did something unprecedented. He contacted his ex-wife. They hadn't spoken since the divorce. 10 years of silence between them. But Sarah had been asking questions about family, about whether she had grandparents or aunts or uncles. Jackson's parents were gone, but Emma's mother, Sarah's grandmother technically, was still alive. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Hello? Claire, it's Jackson." Silence. Then, "Jackson, I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know, I'm sorry. I should have called sooner. I wanted you to know I adopted a daughter. Her name's Sarah. She's 7. More silence. He pressed on. "I know we didn't end well. I know I caused you pain. But if you ever wanted to meet her, to be part of her life, the door's open." Claire's voice was thick with emotion. "You adopted a child?" "It's complicated, but yeah, and Claire, she's amazing. She reminds me of Emma sometimes. The way she looks at the world, her courage." He heard her crying softly. "I'd like to meet her, if that's okay." "It's okay." Claire visited in October. She drove from Grand Junction, 4 hours across mountains, to the cabin. Sarah was nervous. Jackson had explained about Emma, about the grandmother she'd never met, but curious. When Claire stepped out of her car, Jackson saw the shock on her face. Sarah looked nothing like Emma. Different coloring, different build. But something in her smile, in the tilt of her head, must have reminded Claire of her lost granddaughter, because she started crying. Sarah, bless her, walked right up and hugged this stranger. "Grandma Claire, Dad said you make really good cookies." Claire laughed through tears. "I do, and I'll teach you how." They spent the weekend together. Claire taught Sarah to bake. Jackson and Claire talked, really talked, for the first time in years, about Emma, about blame and forgiveness, and how grief makes people cruel when they don't mean to be. "I'm sorry," Claire said on her last evening, sitting on the porch while Sarah slept inside, "for blaming you. It was easier than blaming the mountain or God or randomness. But it wasn't fair." "I blamed me too," Jackson admitted. "Still do sometimes. But you didn't let it stop you from trying again, from saving Sarah. She saved me just as much." Claire squeezed his hand. "Emma would be proud of you. I'm proud of you." Something in Jackson's chest, something that had been locked tight for a decade, finally loosened. By November, Jackson realized he needed to do more. The network might be dismantled, but trafficking didn't end with one case. Children were still vulnerable. Families still desperate for answers. He started small. Volunteered with the search and rescue team again, his first time back in 10 years. His skills were rusty, but still there. Muscle memory kicked in on his second call-out, helping locate a lost hiker. The team welcomed him back without judgment. Then he did something bigger. With Agent Cortez's help and funding from a victim advocacy nonprofit, he established a foundation, the Sarah's Light Initiative. Its mission? To train law enforcement and civilians to recognize signs of trafficking, to fund resources for survivors, and to never let another child disappear into darkness. Sarah insisted on being part of it. At 7 years old, she recorded a video message that played at the foundation's launch. "My name is Sarah Reed," she said into the camera, confident and clear. "I was taken, I was scared, but I'm here now because someone didn't give up on me. If you see something wrong, say something. If you can help, help. You might save someone like me." The video went viral. Donations poured in. Schools requested the training. Other survivors reached out, wanting to share their stories to help others. Jackson had spent a decade in isolation, believing the world was better off without him. Now he understood. The world needed people willing to step into the darkness so others could find light. December brought the first major snow. Jackson and Sarah built a snowman in front of the cabin. She insisted it needed a carrot nose and button eyes, so they hiked to town, only 3 miles now that Jackson had cleared a better trail, and bought supplies. On the way back, Sarah stopped walking and just stared at the mountain. "What is it?" Jackson asked. "I was just thinking. A year ago, I was so scared. I thought I'd never be happy again. But look at me now." Jackson looked, saw a child bundled in a warm coat and boots, mittens dangling from her sleeves, cheeks pink from cold and health, eyes bright with joy. "You did that," he said. "You chose to be brave, to heal, to let people in." "We did it together," she corrected. "You taught me how." They walked home hand in hand. That evening, Sarah asked if they could decorate for Christmas. Jackson hadn't celebrated Christmas in 10 years, but he said yes. They strung popcorn garlands, cut out paper snowflakes, hiked into the forest and selected a small pine tree that Jackson cut down and hauled back. Sarah made ornaments from pine cones and ribbons. They had no star for the top, so she drew one and taped it in place. "Perfect," she declared. On Christmas morning, Sarah woke Jackson before dawn. Dad, wake up. Santa came." Jackson blinked awake, disoriented. He'd bought presents weeks ago, hidden them, set them out last night after Sarah slept. But hearing her call him Dad, hearing her excitement, made it all worth it. She tore into packages with the enthusiasm of a child who'd been given back her childhood. Books, art supplies, a new carving knife with a safety guard, warm pajamas covered in stars. She loved everything. "Your turn," she said, shoving a lumpy wrapped package at him. Jackson opened it carefully. Inside was a wood carving, a chickadee, small, imperfect, beautiful. "You made this?" "Dr. Ellis helped me in our sessions. I wanted to give you something you taught me." Jackson turned it over in his hands. The bird was delicate, fragile, but it had weight, substance, like Sarah herself. "It's perfect," he said, voice rough. "Thank you." They spent Christmas Day being a family, cooking together, playing in the snow, reading by the fire. Simple, ordinary. Everything Jackson had thought he'd never have again. That night, after Sarah went to bed, Jackson sat alone with the chickadee carving, thought about how far they'd both come. From broken to whole, from strangers to family, from winter to spring. His radio crackled, the search and rescue frequency, a call for volunteers, missing hiker, adult male, last seen near the eastern ridge. Jackson grabbed his pack, already moving, stopped at Sarah's door and peeked in. She was sleeping peacefully, the stuffed bear tucked under her arm. He left a note on the kitchen table. "Got a call out. Back by morning. Love you. Dad." Then he headed into the darkness, not running from it this time, walking toward it with purpose, because he'd learned something in the year since finding Sarah in the snow. Darkness existed, evil existed, loss and pain and fear existed, but so did courage and hope, and the stubborn human refusal to let the darkness win. They found the hiker 3 hours later, hypothermic but alive. Jackson wrapped him in thermal blankets, radioed for extraction, stayed with him until the rescue team arrived. "Thank you," the man kept saying. "Thank you for not giving up." Jackson just nodded. "It's what you did. You didn't give up." He made it back to the cabin by dawn, just as he'd promised. Sarah was awake, making breakfast, scrambled eggs only slightly burned. "You found them?" she asked. "We did." "Good." She slid eggs onto a plate. "Now eat. You need your strength." Jackson ate the slightly burned eggs and thought they tasted better than anything he'd had in years. Anyone can turn their life around if they're willing to face the darkness, to choose courage over fear, and to believe that broken things can still be made whole. As spring arrived again, painting the Rockies in wildflowers and new growth, Jackson Reed stood on his porch watching Sarah play in the meadow with Thomas, who'd come for a weekend visit. 2 children who'd survived the unthinkable, now running free, laughing, simply being kids. He thought about the version of himself who'd lived here alone, believing isolation was safety. That man had been wrong about so many things. Safety wasn't found in hiding. It was found in connection, in showing up, in refusing to let fear make you small. The mountain man who saved a little girl had discovered something profound. She'd saved him right back. And together they'd proven that even in the coldest winter, even in the deepest darkness, hope could survive if someone was brave enough to carry it. Jackson Reed had spent a decade running from the past. Now he was building a future. One day, one choice, one moment of courage at a time. Because for him and for Sarah, the story didn't end when the danger passed. It began when they chose to be a family, not by blood, but by something stronger, by choice, by love, by the unwavering belief that everyone deserves a second chance at life. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories of courage, survival, and hope. Click to keep discovering these incredible journeys, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that one person's bravery can change the world.